you for joining this OECD side session from audit to accountability, closing performance gaps through stronger social compliance oversight. My name is Ross Nova. I am the president and CEO of APSCA, the Association of Professional Social Compliance Auditors, and I'm very happy that you're able to join us this morning. Let me just move the slide forward. So let me just briefly run through our agenda for the next 75 minutes. I will start with the opening, and then we will quickly lead into a panel discussion. And we protected 30 minutes at the end to allow for questions. While we're going to talk about ethical compliance and competence and integrity today, and we have a great panel of speakers, please keep in mind questions that you may want to ask. Let me introduce just briefly who I'm joined by today, and you'll see their faces pop up as we go along. With me is Sonia Duarte Silva, who is the auditing manager at the collaborative program amfori. Claire Bright is professor and director at the Nova Business Center for Business Human Rights and the Environment, and is a senior legal advisor at Global Rights Compliance. Anna Maanpa is the head of sustainability at the Finnish retailer SOK. And Edward Mollet is director of development at BCI Compliance Group, which is an APSCA member firm. Let me just run through briefly some housekeeping rules for you today. Again, we're doing Q&A. Please use the Q&A function to post your questions. We now have over 800 people. Hopefully you're able to get in early with questions that come on. We will not be able to get to all your questions and answers today, but we will try in the chat to get to what we can in writing, and then online we will try to answer those questions that we can as well. There will be a satisfaction survey that will be shared after the webinar. Please fill that out. Let us know what we did well. Let us know what we can do better next time. Recordings and slides will be available 1 to 2 days afterwards. So if you missed something, if you want to review, if you want to share this around, please feel free to do so. Once we have this done, you'll receive an email with that recording information. And finally, all the participants are muted. With now over 900 people, you can imagine everyone speaking at the same time. Please use the Q&A function that you have on your screen. So with that, let me introduce the what we're trying to accomplish today and give you some data to kind of frame what we're trying to talk about. The session is designed to discuss the competency and credibility of social compliance auditing. And we're going to focus today on some key actors within the ecosystem and explore how those actors have been benefited by the increasing use of social compliance and acceptance of social compliance auditing as a key part of corporate supply chain due diligence efforts. We'll focus today on the components that constitute a credible social compliance audits, focusing on auditor competency and ethical oversight. There are more actors, there are more factors that go in, but we've just focused it down on those issues which are at the forefront of what we talk about when we talk about effective and appropriate corporate due diligence. And one of the things I want to mention is discussions globally have increased around the need to conduct and report on corporate due diligence efforts, and especially with pending legislation like CSDDD or the legislation we see in places like Thailand and South Korea. Eventually, we're moving towards a condition where the social compliance audit industry will be regulated. It may not be heavy, but that regulation is coming, and that's the context that we're talking about today, that we ensure mutual understanding and alignment around the state and the future of social compliance auditing, so that our industry is well placed to address that legislation that's coming down the line. And ultimately, the goal is not to just increase the use of audits or it increases professionalism. It's to increase the effectiveness so that we're always getting better and better and better at identifying risks of that workers face in global supply chains. So with that, let me just set you a little bit of the context with slides around the use of global compliance auditing and just some numbers that I think are very, very interesting. So let me just go back to switch back to one of the earlier slides. This is, those of you aren't familiar with APSCA, the Association of Professional Social Compliance Auditors was founded 10 years ago as the global oversight and governance body for social compliance auditing. You can see the numbers and the information on the screen, but to help set today's context, take a look at the lower left. Under our umbrella, under our 84 member firms and over 5,300 member auditors, over 185,000 social compliance audits were conducted this year. So we really do see the context of social compliance auditing growing. That number is up 8% year over year. So even though we can get better in terms of competency and credibility, clearly the value of social compliance auditing is not only noted, but is rapidly increasing year over year. In addition to competency and audits, we also come with it. We have some professional conduct cases. We have some ethical concerns that come up in the supply chain. We talk about these all the time. Not only us at APSCA, but everyone here on this panel takes this kind of work seriously, and we hear about it. We hear people say that, oh, social compliance auditing isn't ethical. It's not effective. And while there are cases, I'll push back on our profession being any different in terms of the quality or quantity of ethical issues that we face. However, under APSCA and with our partners, with our member firms and our auditors and our collaborative programs, we are able to identify those cases and see where they are and how they operate and how they impact the ability of auditors to independently assess social compliance audit and working conditions on the ground. So as you can see, those numbers of ethical cases are increasing a lot over the last 2 years. That is not a reflection of the state of the social compliance auditing as much as it's a reflection of the ecosystem actors within social compliance auditing trusting the system, reporting things more, investigations happening more quickly and more effectively. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the types of cases that we see. Inducement is a fancy word, and in effect it means bribery. So probably not surprisingly, that still is the number one issue that we see. And at APSCA, as it is with anyone else, a proven case of bribery is zero tolerance. If an auditor is found to have taken a bribe or assisted in receiving a bribe, that person can never become an APSCA auditor again. They are gone forever. So, but that's an example of the interest in which the ecosystem takes in these types of cases. So with that as background and setting sort of the stage for the competency discussion, the ethical discussion, you have those numbers in the back of your head. I want to now turn to some of our panel speakers and bring them on board and sort of get their take on social compliance auditing. And I am going to start today with Anna from the Finnish retailer SOK. Good morning, Anna. How are you?
Good morning, Ross, and thanks so much for the invite to this panel. It's really great to discuss here with this important topic.
I'm glad you made it. I still think you're, I think, kind of the best person on the panel to kind of set us up. You're the consumer of the social compliance audit. You're the one that requests this to be done. So I wanted to start with you and say, as a retailer, with all of the suppliers that you have, I know that you use social compliance auditing. Why do you do it? Like, what data do you get from it? And how does it fit into your larger corporate due diligence efforts?
Thanks. Just to give you a bit of the background, I work for SOK, which is part of the S Group. S Group is a large cooperative retail business operating mainly in Finland, but then also in Estonia. So we are quite local, but then we do purchasing globally. And our business areas are grocery business. So we have supermarkets and hypermarkets. We also have department stores and, for example, hotels and restaurants. In Finland, we employ more than 40,000 people. And about our sourcing, we have thousands of suppliers. And even we prioritize our risks to most severe, we still have loads of supply chains which we need to engage with. And we really need these scalable tools to manage our risks and impacts. And these tools are, of course, audits and certifications. For us, audits really are an important tool to monitor sustainability and then really gather data about our impacts and risks. And the audits are definitely a tool to sort of check what is the situation with in our supply chains with our suppliers. We have amfori BSCI Code of Conduct as our supplier requirement, and audits are a way to sort of monitor how these requirements come to life. Yes, audit, it's a snapshot tool sort of, but it still gives very valuable information. Then about our risk assessment, we assess risks on country level as well as on industry level. We also do risk assessment on raw materials and, of course, related to our suppliers. And I would say that all in all, audits really provide us important information regarding all these dimensions. Here, I really want to emphasize that audits, they are only one tool in our due diligence box. So audits really doesn't equal to due diligence. So audits provide data, they provide evidence about the compliance in our supply chain, and it's one source of information when we evaluate and assess the credibility of audits, which we are discussing today. I think this needs to be taken account. So for us, audits help us to identify which topics we should focus with our suppliers, whether it's health and safety, whether it's working hours, or for example, management issues. And as we ask regular audits and re-audits with our suppliers, we are also able to see, with the help of the audits, how things develop. So audits really help us to follow this development, and it's kind of important tool when we are on this continuous improvement journey with our suppliers. And yes, of course, there are challenges related to audits, as Ross already explained about ethics or about the audit quality. But this is the kind of challenge I think we all the stakeholders in this audit ecosystem or industry, we need to work together with these issues. Because as said, for our kind of buyer, audits are very, very valuable tool in the due diligence toolbox. So this is why also we have a role in improving the audit quality and engage with different, for example, schemes. But as I said already in the beginning, audits really are only one tool. We need to take other actions. And I think they give us valuable information. But what the real question is regarding due diligence and audits is, what do you do with the information? What kind of actions you take when you get the information from the audit? And that's the essence of the due diligence. Maybe I'll stop here and we can continue discussion then.
I think the question of what you do with that information is absolutely a huge one, and why I wanted to start with you as a branded retailer. You are key in the ecosystem to turning that risk assessment data into action. But you mentioned Anna, and I'm going to move. You mentioned that you work with amfori and BSCI, and you mentioned ethics and integrity, and I wanted to bring Sonia into the conversation. Because I know amfori also, just like APSCA does, and almost every other collaborative program I know of works in the area of ethics. But Sonia, I wanted to bring you on the screen. You at amfori had an audit assurance program in place for a while. Ethics isn't new. Working with retailers like SOK isn't new. Why do you have a program focused on audit integrity, and how have you worked with your customers to implement it? And good morning, by the way.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here today. And thank you all for also to the attendants to be attending to the webinar today. Let's say that ethics is not a new topic. Same, likewise, quality is not a new topic, but we are now, all of us, all the stakeholders, feeling a bit more comfortable to speak about it and to tackle it together. So as a scheme, we at Amfori have introduced the audit assurance program a few years ago, more than 10 already, actually, because at some point we recognized that good intentions alone are not enough to guarantee robust governance and a consistent delivery, and we needed to find a structured, independent way and to test whether our standards were being applied in practice across regions, across partners, and across the full cycle of our operations. So yeah, in order to fulfill this need that already Anna mentioned, to have to be able to use the audit result not only as a snapshot, but kind of a risk management and risk assessment tool. So the audit assurance program came in mainly for 3 reasons. The first one is trust. Our stakeholders rely on the outcomes of our audits, and we wanted a way to show with evidences that our standards are being upheld, not just assuming they are. Second reason was consistency and risk management. With the growth of amfori, you know that when you scale your programs, variation creeps in. So having a structured assurance program helped us to identify gaps early, to harmonize practices, and proactively manage risks before they escalate. And again, here you see that this is not something that we can do on our own. The collaboration is needed with all the stakeholders that are involved in the amfori ecosystem and the social compliance ecosystem. And the third reason for having the assurance program in place was continuous improvement. For us, the work we do is not only about compliance. We want the assurance program to give us insights on what is working well, where support is needed, and how we can keep strengthening the scheme overall. And we are also improving the program itself to adjust to changes in the industry, and that's the reason why in the last 2 years we had this focus on integrity with the 2 integrity projects, actually 3, counting the third that is starting now in 2026, to link quality issues, to find the link between quality issues and integrity issues, and also the real root causes behind the integrity issues that we find in the ecosystem, and also to find a way to mitigate those root causes, a collaborative way to mitigate those root causes. What we would like to say, the team that runs the assurance program at amfori, is that the program keeps us honest. It helps us to learn. And in a way, it also helps us to make sure that the scheme is operating in the way it was designed to, no matter what it is delivered. So it really gives us insights into what's working well and where we can enhance efficiency, where we can support the auditing companies and the auditors better, where we can elevate the overall standard of the scheme. So the assurance program becomes a tool not only for accountability, but also for capacity building. So introducing the program then helped us moving from a reactive oversight to a more preventative and data-driven approach. So it ensures that the scheme remains credible, resilient, trusted, and this becomes even more relevant as the expectations around transparency and governance continue to rise. So, and the program is, again, a shared initiative, a collaborative initiative within all our stakeholders, including APSCA, the members, the business partners, and the auditing companies that work with us. Yeah, I guess I will stop talking. Otherwise, I will have a lot to say about the
We all
about
have
the
a lot to
program
say. No,
itself.
it was really well done, Sonia. And I love the fact that you talk about that root cause analysis, and you brought in all those ecosystem actors
Mhm.
into the conversation. Certainly at APSCA, one of the largest ecosystem for us is our member auditors, and I wanted to bring in Edward Mole because Edward, you're on the ground. You're doing the work, and I'll be honest, sometimes we sit here in our offices and we talk about, schemes and standards and regulations, and it's up at this high level, and you're here to kind of ground us. So I was hoping you could not only sort of introduce yourself a little bit, but kind of talk about, as an auditor, what are some of the daily challenges that you guys handle? How do collaborative programs like amfori and oversight groups like APSCA, how do they support you, and how do they help you address these issues of credibility and competency and ethics and any other challenges you want to talk about on the ground? And good morning, by the way.
Good morning to you as well, and I guess a very early morning to you, Ross, over in the US. So, thank you so much for your question and for inviting me to this panel. Just a little bit about myself and BCI. BCI was founded in the early 2000s. We are a social and environmental auditing firm with operations across East Asia, Southeast Asia, and then Middle East and Africa, as well as in North America. My current role is serving as Director of Development at BCI Compliance Group. So I interface a lot with our teams on the ground in all of our different markets. I work closely with our scheme partners as well as brand partners to ensure that their expectations are flowing through into the actual audits on the ground. So, you know, it's a very interesting question that you ask, Ross, and I think there's a couple of components. The first is I wanted to talk a little bit about challenges. What are the actual challenges that both auditors face on the ground and we as an audit firm face in delivering a consistent social compliance audit product? So, from an auditor perspective, I would say there's a couple main challenges that auditors will face when going into factories on the ground and identifying issues. The first one is that they may face pushback from factories within a local context that might discourage transparency. So there's an inherent tension there. We're there to assess the factory, but the factory, if there are certain issues, may not want those things to be publicized. So that is a challenge for the auditors. And then, as with any profession operating at scale, there's the risk of individual integrity failures of auditors that needs to be identified and addressed early on. So that's sort of a systemic issue that we have to address consistently and across time. And thirdly, I would say for auditors themselves, there's just a large volume of information, documents, interviews, scheme rules, labor laws that they have to process within a very fixed time frame when they are actually doing an audit. So, um, all that to say, there are many challenges that auditors have to face. From the firm perspective, I would say the overarching challenge is what are the moving pieces that we need to push on to ensure that we are delivering a consistent, credible product that's backed with integrity as well as competency of all of the people that we employ, all the systems that we deploy, so that we can provide that high confidence snapshot view into what the factories are like to the end partners, which are schemes, which are brands, NGOs, regulators, etc. Uh, and a couple of points here, I'd say the main challenge, the main points are how do we bring together, number one, the right culture mixed with the correct internal controls that can be scaled across different markets. Number two, how can we integrate consistently oversight from APSCA, the schemes that we work with, as well as brands? And number three, how can we collaborate in a transparent way with the other stakeholders in the market so that we get to the actual picture of what's going on globally at factories throughout the world. So I would say the first one is that the first key point I want to make is that we're very focused on how do we bring together the right culture, but reinforced by strong internal controls to ensure that we're delivering competent product as well as a product with integrity. Um, and um, it's a challenge to scale this across markets. We found that with culture specifically, it often starts with headquarters, then flows to the local leadership team, and then flows down from the leadership team to their actual local auditor teams. So culture is very important to us because um, with the right culture, we can continue driving to an excellent product. With the wrong culture, a lot of the controls that you put into place will start to face stress. But at the same time, as culture, we also need to have that be reinforced by robust internal controls. So those include things like separation of the business development function and the quality and integrity function, conflict screening, so screening for conflict of interest for people who are performing audits or people who are developing relationships with brands and factories. It includes things like auditor rotation, so we don't have the same auditors going to the same factories and knowing the factory management year after year. It includes things like escalation channels. In what way do issues get escalated, either from if they're raised from NGOs or they're raised from the factory or they're raised from workers? How do those things get escalated in a way that folks feel that the reporting channel and the whistleblowing channel is credible and is going to be responded to? So that's the first part. How do you mix the right culture with the right internal controls? The second part is the schemes and industry bodies that we work with. So schemes being folks like amfori or other audit other schemes that we work with, and APSCA, which is more of an industry body. They consistently do audits of us. So what we are do when we're doing oversight of our teams, all the various stakeholders that rely on us to deliver credible audits are doing oversight of us. And they're making sure that we can deliver the right systems at scale so that we're doing everything we need to do. So, um, you know, we probably undergo a large number of audits every single year where our management systems are getting feedback from all of our various partners. They're ensuring that, our governance and our internal controls are constantly being improved, that risks are being identified, and that we are, as an organization, learning to constantly tailor and improve those systems. So that's a very helpful aspect. And I would say the third is that the third is collaborative external oversight that enables candor and learning. So we don't have always the entirely full picture. We are one element of the due diligence chain, but the schemes and the brands that we work with, or NGOs that go into factories that we are auditing, will also have different sets of information that they're seeing on the ground. And what's very helpful for us that we found is transparent communication, real in-person communication between ourselves and the different stakeholders on the ground and in the overall industry, so that we can freely share information and risks and worries that we have with each other. So I'll just give like one very practical example, and then I'll conclude my remarks of how all of this kind of works together. Um, we had a market where internal controls, not the audit itself, surfaced some early warning signs about the way that audits were being conducted by a particular team member in that market. And there were some inconsistencies in what was actually happening in the factory, and there were inconsistencies between different sets of data that we were receiving at the headquarters level and looking at. What was very helpful for us was actually engaging with APSCA as well as the relevant scheme that we were working with, because they had a different picture as well, and they were able to bring in different pieces of this puzzle to work with us in a transparent way. And we were eventually able to get to the bottom of the situation, identify any gaps, and essentially improve over time, improve the management system. So I'll conclude there. I think that, basically the main takeaway I'd like the group to have is there are multiple types of challenges facing auditors and audit firms. For us, oversight has had a critical role. Our oversight of our teams, the relevant industry stakeholders' oversight of us as an audit firm, and collaboratively sharing information has allowed us to work together to deliver a product which is a social compliance audit with integrity and competence. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. That was really, really good. I'm sorry, I was taking notes on what you were saying. I loved how you framed out the three issues that you deal with. I loved how you dealt with culture and integrity, but I also loved how you addressed the criticism of different people, different standards, different data may yield different results. And I think that's one of the criticisms that we face in social compliance auditing. Why does an audit capture every possible issue every single time? And I think you really hit on a key factor that as a snapshot with different people and different codes of conduct and different data requirements the auditor is facing, you yield different results, and hence collaboration of results more broadly would be a good idea. And I think it's something the industry is working towards, a much more public disclosure of individual factor results so we can all learn and share together. So thank you, Edward, for that, for laying that groundwork. I want to get to the last panelist that you all haven't met yet, and that's Claire, bringing in the legal background. As a lawyer myself, I am particularly partial to Claire's approach to things. But Claire, we talked about. Anna started off with what due diligence is and framed around sort of her need for credible data. Edward just sort of led us to you to talk about, that the credible data doesn't necessarily have to capture anything because of the variety of the standards or the people or the time that you have on the ground. Um, I kind of want to turn to you and say, from a legal perspective, where is the social compliance audit industry, and what does a credible audit look like from a legal or legislative perspective? And good morning to you.
Good morning, Ross. Good morning, everyone. And thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute to this very important discussion. I'd like to start by echoing something you said earlier on, Ross, on the importance of audits. Now, in the study that I co-authored for the European Commission on due diligence requirements through the supply chains, which form the basis of the CSDDD, we saw in our market study that audits remain one of the most used tools indeed by companies to meet their human rights and environmental due diligence responsibilities. So if audits are being used, what we need is to make sure that we get them right. And so indeed, I think the topic of this, the theme of this session is very important, because the question really becomes how to make them credible and effective. And we see that despite decades of audits, serious labor rights violations continue to be uncovered, sometimes repeatedly, and even in factories that had recently passed audits. So this reality has really raised the question around the credibility of social compliance systems. Now, if we look from a legal perspective, this credibility challenge matters because we are entering in a new regulatory phase. We see across multiple jurisdictions mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence laws that are being developed or strengthened. We already have existing laws in France, in Germany, in Norway, now at the EU level with the CSDDD. And Ross was reminding us earlier of the legislative proposals beyond the EU as well that are being discussed in countries such as Brazil, South Korea, Colombia, Thailand, Canada, and others. So legally speaking, there are 5 key elements really around what makes an audit credible. And it really begins with the independence. And we heard that from Edward. So I'd just like to echo Edward's words here. Auditors must be able to operate free from commercial influence. If auditors feel pressure to deliver favorable results in order to maintain business relationship, then the integrity of findings is compromised. So regulatory authorities increasingly are and will be looking at independence and conflict of interest safeguards when assessing compliance systems. And so a credible system therefore requires mechanisms that protect auditor their objectivity, including transparent appointments processes, safeguards against consultancy and auditing conflicts. Now, a second element is the robustness of the methodology, right? So an audit must be capable of actually identifying risks and violations. This means going beyond checklist inspections. Effective audits involve worker interviews conducted under safe conditions, cross-checking information from different sources, examining of wage and working hour records over time, but also an understanding of operational realities within factories. And without such depth, audit risks identifying only surface level compliance issues, but actually missing the systemic problems, which are most of the time at the root cause of the most serious issues. So from a due diligence perspective, processes that cannot realistically detect risks may actually be considered to be insufficient or inadequate. A third element that is also essential and perhaps really a centerpiece of the system is the meaningful engagement with workers themselves. Now, we know that due diligence standards emphasize stakeholder engagement. It's actually been made a key component of the CSDDD, for example, the whole due diligence process. And we know that workers who are part of the right holders that companies should consult as part of their due diligence process are also often the first to know where the risks exist or where at least some of the key risks exist. Yet we do see that some traditional audit methods sometimes fail to capture their experience due to fear of retaliation or lack of trust. So credible audits must integrate worker voice through safe interview conditions, effective grievance mechanisms, and collaboration with worker representatives or trade unions where they are present. Now, another key point is transparency, which is also playing an increasingly important role. We see that due diligence laws expect companies to demonstrate how risks are being identified and addressed. And credible audit processes therefore require proper documentation, risk classification, and monitoring of corrective action over time. Transparency does not necessarily mean public disclosure of every single detail of the audit, of course, but it does require traceability of findings and actions. Companies need to be able to show not only what was discovered, but also how the problems were addressed and whether improvements were actually sustained. And perhaps most importantly, credible audits must be connected to remediation and improvement. From a regulatory perspective, due diligence is not satisfied by identifying harm alone. Companies are expected to act on the findings. So audits that repeatedly identify the same violations, but without leading to meaningful remediation or systemic improvement will fail the accountability test. The credible audit process therefore includes follow-up verification, corrective action monitoring, and collaboration between suppliers and buyers. And that's a very, very important point to address the root causes of the issues that have been identified, including, where relevant, which is often the case, commercial pressures that may contribute to poor labor conditions. So sometimes what is required is a sort of 360 audits, right? And this discussion is particularly important also when we consider third-party initiatives and certification schemes that also Anna referred to earlier. Many companies rely on such initiatives as part of their compliance strategies. And it's important to remember that being a member of an initiative or possessing a certificate does not automatically demonstrate that due diligence obligations are fulfilled. Regulators and judges increasingly examine whether these initiatives actually deliver credible oversights. So these initiatives remain very valuable, but their credibility depends on the strength of their standards, the independence of their verification processes, their engagement with workers, and their ability to ensure remediation when violation occurs. So to conclude, in this context, the conversation really needs to move towards assessing whether oversight systems actually make a difference on the ground towards better outcome for the people and for the planet. So the goal is not to conduct more audits, but to ensure that audits contribute to safer working conditions, fairer wages, and stronger worker protections. If audit systems becomes exercises in documentation rather than instruments of improvements, they risk being counterproductive and losing their legal and moral legitimacy. And on a final note, I wanted to also fully echo Anna's words earlier that audits are a very important tool. Nonetheless, they are only one tool within the due diligence toolbox of companies. And their value really depends on how they are designed and used. Legal expectations are increasingly clear. Companies must demonstrate that their due diligence measures are effective. And for audits, credibility will be measured not by the number conducted, but by whether they lead to measurable improvements for the workers. And I'll stop here for now. Thank you, Russ.
Thank you, Claire. That was really well done. Again, you caught me writing all of the things down. That was a lot there, and I thought that was really, really well done. And that it kind of leads back. I think you brought in everyone else on the panel in your answer. I'm going to ask you, and this may also be a question for Edward. Claire, you said in order to have a credible and effective audit, you need a robust system, but that the audit on the ground has to go, quote, beyond the surface level, has to get deep. With legislation that's coming, with litigation that may be out there, how do I know? Like, what does that mean to get beyond the surface level? And what is a robust system? What's the interplay between a system and particularly, Claire, like you can have is a robust system, does robust mean a lot of data? And if there is a lot of data, then maybe does that impact going beyond the surface level? And is there a tension between a robust system and the ability of the auditor to implement that system effectively on the ground?
Thanks so much, Ross. So when we talk about this robustness, really the conversation goes into the idea of appropriateness again. You know, what is appropriateness? In fact, that notion is emphasized as key in the CSDDD. You know, it's not enough for companies to have a due diligence process; it needs to be a robust one. And how does the CSDDD define robustness? It also includes elements of effectiveness, right? So if we sort of, in other words, the expectation here is really shifting from procedural compliance to outcome-based responsibilities. And more we will see courts, regulators, but also civil society and affected stakeholders asking not whether a company conducted audits, but whether its due diligence measures and its audits were appropriate given the circumstances to foster this better outcome for the people and the planet. So if labor violations persist despite repeated audits, again, regulators and courts may question whether the due diligence process itself and the audits were adequate. In that sense, ineffective audits can actually become a legal risk rather than a safeguard. So part of the credibility problem will then stem from the structural limitations of the traditional auditing model, where audits are, for example, based on short visits, announced in advance, relying heavily on documentation reviews, on-site inspections, etc. We know that these can easily be staged. We know that sometimes workers can feel unsafe to speak openly. We know that records may be prepared in anticipation of audits. Auditors themselves may face commercial pressure. Edward was reminding us of that earlier. And audits frequently, or at least a traditional model, focus on identifying non-compliance rather than understanding the root causes, such as purchasing practices, for example, production timelines, or wage structure. So this is what I meant earlier when I was talking about that 360 audits, which goes also to question the whole role that the buyer itself may play in contributing to harms on the ground.
Thank you, Claire. That's awesome. With that, and again, anyone else on the panel, please feel free to weigh in. Anna, Claire had talked about, again, the sort of the same thing, the robust systems and going beyond surface level. Edward talked about the governance that he's experienced in terms of culture and making sure that the combination between what happens at the head office happens on the ground. And Sonia talked about how amfori takes audit integrity and programmatically addresses it and gets ahead of it. When you're as a retailer, as the ultimate consumer of the audit, when you're looking for a credible audit, what does a credible audit mean to you, and what factors are you looking at to determine what scheme to follow, what audit firm to hire, and then most especially, what do you do with those results?
Yes, as said, I think the credibility of the audits, it's really the core thing of the audits. And what is important for us as a buyer, it is that we can rely on the data that we get from the audits. And I think also different stakeholders, not only us as buyers, but also suppliers and workers need to be able to trust for the scheme. So that's why it is so important that we also have common standards and we have common criteria that also APSCA can push onwards. So that the accountability for these stakeholders is kind of met. Related to audits, I also see that the continuous development, continuous improvements need to be sort of in the core of the audits and audit schemes. And of course, societies are changing all the time and geopolitics are changing, and it really affects for the audits also. And schemes need to keep up in the base, and it's of course a huge challenge for us as a buyer and for schemes also. I also see that to be credible, it's important and different actors in the ecosystem, they do open stakeholder dialogue. It's a sort of basis for the improvement, so that we can push things forward. Regarding the audits, from buyer perspective, it's really important that there are high qualification requirements from the schemes to the audit companies and auditors. As I said before, the audit quality really is in the heart of the credibility of the audit systems, and the high qualification criteria ensure this. And also the comparability of the audit, it's something we really value as a buyer. I also want to stress here that the role of auditors, it's really important in our monitoring efforts, and we really value also the know-how that auditors have. That's why the professional skills and continuous learning are the key issues for auditors from our side. And also that the schemes and the auditors, we know that the cultural contexts and the politics, for example, the social situation in society, it really affects for the audits. And this is also important that auditors and audits are able to kind of take this account, because it really has impact for the audit results. Also, it's important the industry knowledge, that different schemes or different auditors, professionals are able to take account the different audits. It's of course very different if you audit textile factory in Bangladesh or then on the other hand, let's say pineapple farm in Thailand. And I think the ability to also observe things that kind of happened happens beyond the audit framework or the checklist is relevant. I would also like to comment something for the last discussion about what Claire said about the critiques for the audits, that they have been going on years, but there is still challenges. And as I said in the beginning, the information we receive from audits is really valuable, but we are often talking about systemic issues related to human rights, and we need other tools in addition to audits to be able to really create long-term change. And we need to have stakeholder engagement in our values change in our sourcing country with different stakeholders. By this I mean, for example, NGOs or labor unions, also decision makers. And it's of course for our kind of business, it's a challenge as we have that many supply chains. We need to kind of also find scalable tools. But this is something that I think maybe sustainability schemes could also be a platform for this kind of deeper stakeholder engagement, what we could then do together in our supply chains. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna. I appreciate that answer. Really well thought out, and I'm glad you were bringing in what Claire said as well. Kind of speaking of what Claire said, Edward, we've been talking about criticisms today, and I know none of the criticisms apply to any of us on this panel because all of us are awesome. But there have been criticisms that social compliance audits can be, again, that surface level. You're skipping, on the surface. Do audits, in your experience, suffer from that? And is it systemically so? Is it on occasion? Is there any truth to some audits being just on the surface?
Yeah, thank you, Ross, for that question. And I'll start by saying that some of these critiques are definitely valid. The profession has evolved since a lot of these critiques have been made. There's always more work to be done, but for sure, some of these critiques are valid. And I would say that, on Claire and Anna's point that audits can be somewhat surface level, we've seen, I mean, we've been in the industry since, the early 2000s, that as social compliance audits started to be widespread in the early 2000s, they did suffer a lot from sort of surface level checklist-based exercises. Over time, there was a realization from brands, from schemes, other stakeholders, regulators, that this process was insufficient and that we didn't want to have simply a sort of a checklist exercise. We were actually looking for, to go in again into Claire and Anna's point, looking for a snapshot picture of the factory that is detailed, applies the individual judgment of the auditors on the site, and can actually be incorporated over time into the due diligence process of the end user of that report, so that corrections are being made. So with that realization over time, through the 2000s, the 2010s, multiple things were layered in to requirements of auditors and audit firms, one after the other, that have improved the depth of the actual audits, the ability of audits to identify the actual situation on the ground, the actual social compliance situation on the ground. There's a couple of examples. For example, the corrective action plans. When there's an issue that the factory has been uncovered at the factory, the corrective action plans cannot be a simple, we'll correct this. It has to go deep and be a deep dive into what actually went wrong. What are the root causes in the factory that created the conditions that led to a non-compliance? And then not only that those have to make sense, they over time have to be monitored and closed. And I mean, for us as an audit firm as well, we're looking back whenever we conduct an audit this year, we're looking back at reports from last year or the year before to the extent that it's available to us to see, is there a trend in here to make sure that things are actually improving on a systemic level on the ground. Um, and then I would say that one thing that's been really helpful in this context has been when APSCA's come in and implemented two things. One is the continuous professional development. So what has helped actually uncover real issues in factories, part of that is having an up-to-date understanding of what are the requirements of the schemes and the brands that we partner with, which needs to be filtered down into the local teams through continuous professional development and trainings, and the APSCA exams. So particularly, APSCA has a part 1, 2, 3 exam for those who don't know. They increase in difficulty. The most difficult one is the APSCA Part 3 exam. What that has, what's essentially required to pass the APSCA Part 3 exam is the ability of the auditor to actually go deep and follow up on potential issues that are surfaced through this exam. So it's like a mock interview, and it essentially assesses if this auditor is good at actually using triangulation, not a checklist exercise, to go deep and actually identify real issues. So that requirement, that systematic requirement, plus continuous training, plus what's been happening for a long time in the audit industry, which is sort of an apprenticeship model where newer auditors are learning on a team with very experienced auditors. All of these things combined have helped to improve the ability of audits to actually give a clear picture of what's happening on the ground. So, in conclusion, some issues are certainly very valid. That situation has been changing through the work of many different stakeholders. It's a moving target, but we have to keep collaborating and improving.
Indeed. Thank you, Edward. Yeah, we do. That collaboration is absolutely key. And that's a nice segue, Edward. I'd like to get to some of the questions that were raised, and thank you everyone for throwing things out there. And again, panelists can turn their camera on. Sonia, I wanted to turn to you because I've just been impressed by amfori's work, not only with integrity in general, but specifically our audit integrity program. I know a lot of collaborative programs, brands, firms, have programs like that. I'm just familiar with yours, so I think you may be the perfect person to answer the first question. Because it says inducement and documentation related cases often arise under time, cost, or access pressure. How should leadership define buyer accountability in mitigating these risks rather than treating them solely as audit or ethics issues? And I think you're perfectly situated because you're between the audit firm and the auditors and the buyers, right? You're in that sweet spot between the two, and so hopefully you could take a stab at answering that question.
Yeah, and luckily I've also been wearing the auditor hat and sitting in an audit firm for a long time. So I hope I can help to answer this question a bit. Again, for us is like all linked with shared responsibilities and all linked with collaboration. I don't know if you remember, but in our first meeting, I told you that when I joined amfori, I made up a word, and the word was collaboration, because I think it's we are at the point where we need to kind of shift from discussing the topics, but somehow acting together on solving the topics. And actually, as you also know, this topic was covered in our AIP, Audit Integrity Project, last year. And the root cause analysis showed again that there is shared responsibility for those cases. So when inducement or the documentation issues arise, it's easy, very easy to label them as purely auditor ethics failure. But in reality, many of those risks originate from a mix of different root causes. So because the buyers were mentioned in the question, I'll start with the buyers. So they shape the audit environment. When timelines are unrealistic, audit fees are pushed too low, or supplier access is restricted, we create conditions where ethical compromises become more likely. That's not an auditor failure, it's a governance issue. And the leaders need to make it clear that audits cannot be rushed for commercial convenience, and that full and filtered access to documents, sites, workers is non-negotiable. Secondly, APSCA plays a crucial accountability role here also, because APSCA ensures auditors and audit firms uphold professional and ethical standards, and they also provide disciplinary structure when issues occur. So APSCA's oversight reinforces independence, helps maintain trust in the profession. But the role of APSCA here is also complementary in safeguarding the auditor conduct and not the systemic issues around it. So audit firms themselves, they carry significant responsibility. They must ensure enough number of auditors are competent, adequately trained, and have the capacity to conduct thorough audits, even under challenging conditions. This means investing in ongoing technical ethical training, managing workloads to prevent rushed or compromised audits, providing auditors with the support when they face ethical dilemmas during the audits, and by cultivating a culture where integrity is valued over client satisfaction. So the better trained, the better support the auditor feels, the less vulnerable he is to inducement. And this is where really the audit firms can make the bigger difference. So, because my grandfather used to tell me that when you point fingers to other people, you should also point at least one to yourself. Let me point now the finger to the scheme. The scheme has key responsibilities in setting the tones and the frameworks. So, as a scheme, we define the rules of engagement, meaning establishing the clear integrity expectations for our parts, designing audit protocols that minimize the vulnerability to inducement or manipulation, ensuring that the firms and auditors are properly trained on the methodology, and stepping in decisively when we do see patterns of risks emerging, whether caused by suppliers, buyers, auditors, or even the way our ecosystem might be designed. So we also act as a convener when the issues arise, bringing brands, auditors, and facilities together, escalating concerns, making decisions that protect the credibility of the entire environment. So to tackle this issue, we need a shared responsibility model. Buyer practices must remove pressure that create ethical risks. Auditors must uphold independence and professional standards. APSCA must enforce accountability at fractional and firm level. and the schemes to create the right governance, clarity, and oversight to make ethical auditing possible. So it is not the responsibility of one actor. Buyers remove pressures, audit firms build, maintain auditor competence and capacity, APSCA enforces professional standards and accountability, auditors uphold independence, rigor, and we provide the governance clarity and escalation structure to hold the entire system together. So instead of pointing at one party, we try or should ensure that every actor plays their role in protecting the audit integrity. And that was the purpose of our integrity project last year, to work on together, to share what we learned together, to share the responsibility on bringing a solution that can work. As our president usually says, sharing is caring. And because we care about ethics in this environment, we try to bring everybody together into a shared responsibility approach to this problem. Thank you.
Thank
Again,
you.
speaking too much.
Not at all, not at all. I know everyone has been patient. We have 8 minutes left. I'm looking at everyone's, frankly, quite amazing questions. I will say that we will not be able to get to them all, but we will try to, as a group afterwards, answer those questions that we can't answer live. I kind of want to end with one other question here. And it's a little bit of maybe of a combination of a few. A number of you are talking about can auditors get to the root causes, or if they do get to a root cause, how do we fix it? And it's interesting. We haven't talked about the role of the audit sites, the factory, the fishing vessel, the farm, in improving worker conditions here. And maybe this is a question for Sonia. Maybe you say on the screen, Anna. Maybe this is part of it to you. But Claire had mentioned earlier on about the role of remediation, that's part of the ecosystem, that's part of an effective audit. If you take a look at APSCA's standard for a competent audit, we require effective remediation as well. So I'm sensing that theme. But and Livia, I believe, asked this question. But how do you train an audit site to get better? How do you bring together an auditor's role is not to educate the site, it's to assess. I would agree with that. Are there plans for training programs accessible for, I assume, the audit side to be like, well, if my fire extinguisher out, or if I don't know how to properly do payroll, how do factories learn how to get better? I don't know. Sonia, Anna, Claire, anyone want to weigh in?
I'll be very brief. For amfori part, we do have training programs for business partners. So there are trainings available in our auditor, in our training academy for all or almost all the topics covered by our social compliance audits, and also for continuous improvement. Why is it important? Why? How can they make profit out of it? How does it impact positively their companies? And all those trainings are available for free in our academy for the sites that are part of amfori environment. And also this is shared in the Network Connect meetings live when they come with questions for us. So very briefly, this is how it works for amfori. Anna, handing.
Thanks so much. I really want to answer because this is a great question and great topic. And we have also identified that this is really something we need to work with in upcoming years. So there is great potential in capacity building and learning also together with our suppliers. And I think by awareness raising, learning, capacity building, we are really able to create long-term change. Yes, we are a member of amfori, as said before, so we also encourage our suppliers to participate to amfori's trainings, and it's also important part of this this capacity building. But yeah, in the future, I think we should really focus on these topics together. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna, for that. I don't know if anyone else, if Claire or Edward, wanted to weigh in. I think we have time for one more question. And again, everyone, you asked really, really good questions. I wish we had more time. I see some themes about auditors. There's still a lot of data, and you have to go from scheme to scheme. There's not an audit to audit without enough time to prepare, to write the report. I think we can have an entire separate session on that. It recently came up at our annual conference. The stress that leads to maybe audit results aren't as robust as they could be if there's not enough time to adequately prepare. There's too much data. One final question I think we have time for: how can APSCA integrate worker voice mechanisms into audit frameworks to go beyond compliance checklists? I can certainly start with that. I mean, a competent social compliance audit doesn't mean that you can't have other worker voice mechanisms. We heard Claire talk about the role of unions. There's worker surveys that would feed into that. Any information would help that gathers worker voice. I think makes an audit more robust. I think a key that we heard and Edward hit on a lot is collaboration. I think the key is to make sure that if there are other worker voice mechanisms that are being utilized, that is actually shared with the auditor on the ground so they can take advantage of it. So I'm hearing that theme of collaboration coming in there. But certainly a competent audit, and Edward would tell you that, everyone on the panel would tell you a competent audit has to have worker interviews done in a way that protects the identity of the worker, the confidentiality of the information, but that it's also used properly to triangulate the evidence that's listed in the audit report that's given to the consumer, like Anna. So I think just with that one, I think that worker voice is going to continue to be important and continue to have brands, retailers, everyone in the ecosystem bring in everyone else that's assessing worker well-being to make sure we have that full 360-degree review. With that, let me start wrapping things up by saying thank you to all of our panelists, to Claire, Anna, Edward, and Sonia. Thank you for doing this. Any panel like this has people behind the scenes that supports setting this up, running this, and making sure that it's effective. And I just want to thank everyone behind the scenes at APSCA and amfori that helped make this session valuable. Again, you guys these questions are just so good. I wish we had more time. We will try to answer these over the next few days and submit this along with the recording and the slides that you have. I want to remind everybody that there is a way for you to give us feedback. Please fill out the survey. I believe that is, hopefully that's the link on the screen that will help you do that. So that we can always do a better job. And next year, hopefully, we can all be together physically in Paris during a live session. So with that, let me again thank everyone. Thank you to the over 1,000 people that attended the webinar. We appreciate your feedback. We appreciate you attending, and enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you, everybody.